The rain started somewhere around Flagstaff. Not a gentle rain. The kind that comes sideways in January, mixed with sleet, the kind that turns the highway into a mirror and makes every set of headlights look like it's coming straight at you. My wipers were doing their best, but my best has never been good enough for an Arizona winter storm, and apparently neither were they. I had been driving for 7 hours already. My left hip was screaming at me. The same hip I had replaced 2 years ago. The one the surgeon said would give me a new lease on life. I guess he forgot to mention it would still ache like an old wound every time the temperature dropped below 40. I shifted in the seat, adjusted my grip on the wheel, and told myself what I always tell myself on long drives: just the next mile. Just get to the next mile. Tell me something. Have you ever driven through a storm to be somewhere for someone, only to find out they never really wanted you there at all? I was 71 years old, retired. I had spent 38 years building a small chain of regional hardware stores across New Mexico and Arizona, the kind of stores where the staff knew your name and you could still get someone on the phone. I had sold the last of them 4 years ago, quietly, without fanfare. The buyer was a private equity firm out of Chicago. They paid me well, more than well. More than I ever told anyone in my family, actually, because I had learned by then that money has a way of changing how people look at you, and I had already watched it change my son. His name is Derek. Derek is 43. He married a woman named Priya 8 years ago, and for the first year I thought she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. She was sharp, organized, the kind of person who sent thank you notes within 24 hours. Then the notes stopped. And so did the visits, and so did the phone calls, unless something needed paying for. But I am getting ahead of myself. The reason I was driving through that storm was my granddaughter, Nora. She was 6 years old, and she had told me, in her precise, serious way that made her sound 40, that she wanted me at her school's winter showcase. It was a Tuesday night. She had a solo. She had practiced Jingle Bells on the recorder for 3 months, and she had called me herself on Derek's phone and said, "Grandpa Walt, you have to come." I practiced the hard part. I would have driven through a hurricane for that child. So there I was. 7 hours. Sleet, left hip, and a paper bag on the passenger seat with the stuffed bear wearing a little red scarf that I had found at a shop in Albuquerque because Nora collects stuffed animals and I never show up empty-handed. I pulled off the highway to get gas outside of Sedona and stood in the sleet pumping fuel into my old Silverado, and I thought about calling ahead. Derek had texted me the address of their new house. They had moved in October, a bigger place in a gated community north of Phoenix, and I had not yet seen it. I thought about calling to say I was close. Then I thought, no. Nora knew I was coming. That was enough. I did not call. That was either the worst decision I made that night or the best one. I am still not entirely sure which. The neighborhood was the kind that takes itself very seriously. Stone pillars at the entrance, mailboxes that match, driveways so wide you could land a small aircraft. I found the house, number 14, with a 3-car garage and a row of ornamental olive trees along the front walk, and pulled in beside a silver Mercedes I did not recognize. The front lights were on, the windows were glowing warm. Through the glass of the front door, I could see movement, people, what looked like a dinner party in progress. I sat in the truck for a moment. I had not known about any dinner party. Derek had not mentioned anything beyond, "Yeah, Dad, come for the showcase, Nora will be thrilled." But then Derek rarely mentioned things to me directly anymore. I was informed of events the way you inform a distant relative, enough to technically include me, not enough to make me feel actually wanted. I grabbed the paper bag with the bear. I opened the truck door and the cold hit me all at once, and my hip made its opinion known as I stepped down onto the driveway. I straightened up slowly, the way old men do when they think nobody is watching, and I walked toward the front door. The door was not quite latched. This is the part I have replayed more times than I can count. If the door had been properly shut, I would have knocked. I would have stood on the porch and knocked, and Derek would have opened it, and whatever was happening inside would have been adjusted, composed, rearranged before I ever saw it. but the door was open just enough that when I raised my hand to knock, it swung inward on its own, and I heard them. Not all of it. Just enough. Priya's voice first. She has a carrying voice, always has, talking to someone I couldn't see from the doorway. He's probably lost. You know how he is with the GPS. Or broke down. Honestly, Derek, I told you not to give him the new address directly. He should have stayed at the Holiday Inn and met us at the school. Laughter. A man's laugh I didn't recognize. Then Derek. He insisted. You know how he gets. Acts like everything is still 1987 and he can just show up anywhere. More laughter. Then Priya again. Quieter but still clear. He has no idea, does he? He actually thinks we want him here. I stood in the doorway with the sleet at my back and a paper bag in my hand, and I listened to my son laugh at his own father. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment. I know what the story is supposed to say. That I was heartbroken, devastated, blindsided. And I was. All of those things hit me at once the way cold water hits you when you fall into a lake in November. But underneath all of it, almost before the pain, there was something else, something very quiet and very clear. I had heard enough. I pulled the door back to where it had been. I turned around. I walked back to my truck, set the paper bag with the stuffed bear carefully on the seat, and I sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. My hip hurt. My eyes were doing something I don't want to call. Crying because I have not cried since my wife Eleanor passed. But they were doing something. Outside, the sleet had turned back to rain. I started the truck. But I did not leave. Here is what you need to understand about me, and about the years that led to that night. I grew up in Tucson, the son of a man who fixed air conditioners for a living. We were not poor, but we were close enough to it that I knew what it felt like. I put myself through community college, then state school. Then I started working for a hardware distributor at 23, and I watched how things worked, and I took notes, and I saved money, and when I was 32, I opened my first store on Menal Boulevard in Albuquerque with a $40,000 loan and a handshake from a banker who is dead now. God rest him. I named it Callaway Hardware because my mother's family name was Callaway and I wanted something of hers in whatever I built. Derek grew up watching me work. He had every opportunity I never had. Good schools, a used car at 16, college paid in full, a down payment on his first apartment as a gift because Eleanor insisted and I could not say no to Eleanor about anything, ever. I did not mind any of it. You want more for your children than you had. That is the deal. That is how it is supposed to work. What I did not anticipate was that Derek would come to see generosity as a fixed obligation, that he would interpret my giving as evidence that he was owed rather than loved. I noticed it slowly, the way you notice water damage in a wall, first a small discoloration, then something larger. Then one day you press your hand against it and find that there is nothing solid left. It was around the time I sold the third store, when Derek was 35 and had started working in commercial real estate, that he began talking to me differently, shorter, more efficient. The calls started happening when he needed something. Investment advice, help with a down payment on the Phoenix house, the old one, not the new one, just a bridge loan. Dad will pay it back. They never did, but I never asked. Because I still believed in the version of Derek that called me on my birthday and asked about my knee surgery and remembered Eleanor's favorite hymn. I sold the last stores 18 months after Eleanor died. I sold them for more than anyone in my family knew. The proceeds went into a trust managed by a woman named Annette at a firm in Santa Fe. Annette is 62, meticulous, and has the particular gift of being entirely unmoved by sentiment, which is exactly what I needed. She had helped me set things up carefully, not because I was planning anything in particular, but because Eleanor always said, Walter, you need to protect what you built, and I had finally listened to her, just too late for her to see it. I had also, for the past 2 years, quietly been involved as a silent co-investor in a commercial real estate development on the east side of Phoenix. Not because I know anything about commercial real estate, because my attorney, a man named Don, who I have known since we were both 30 and arguing about the Broncos, told me the opportunity was real and the return would be substantial. It was. I mention all of this only so that you understand, when I sat in that truck outside my son's house in the rain, I was not a helpless old man with nowhere to go and nothing to stand on. I was something else entirely. I pulled out my phone and I called Don. "It's Walt," I said. "Walt, it's 9 o'clock. "I know what time it is," I said. "I need to ask you something. That dinner we have scheduled with the Ellison group, the one we'd been pushing back. The Thursday meeting, can you move it to tomorrow night? Phoenix, and I need you to make a call to Gerald. Gerald is my accountant. Gerald knows everything there is to know about my finances, which means Gerald knows things my own son does not know." Don was quiet for a moment. "Walt, what's going on?" "I'll explain tomorrow," I said. "Can you do it?" He said he could. Then I looked up the address of the hotel I had stayed at last time I was in Phoenix, the Biltmore, which Eleanor loved because of the Frank Lloyd Wright history and the way the grounds looked in winter, and I made a reservation, a suite, because it was available, and because I was 71 years old and my hip was killing me, and I had just stood in a sleet storm and listened to my son laugh, and I felt in that moment that I had earned a good mattress. Then I drove away. I did not tell Derek I had arrived. I did not tell him I was leaving. I found a parking lot 2 blocks from Nora's school and I sat there until 8:45 when I could see families beginning to arrive for the showcase. I went inside and found a seat in the second row on the aisle where I knew Nora would be able to see me from the stage. I did not look for Derek or Priya in the crowd. I kept my eyes on the doorway where the children would come in. When Nora walked out with her class, she was wearing a green velvet dress and holding her recorder in both hands like it was something precious. She was scanning the audience the way children do, looking for the face she needed. She found mine, the look on her face. I cannot describe it without doing it a disservice. It was not surprise. It was more like confirmation. Like she had believed I would be there, and here was the proof. She played Jingle Bells with the focused gravity of a child who has practiced the hard part. And I sat in the second row and my eyes did that thing again. And I did not care who saw. After the showcase, I found her in the hallway. She ran at me with both arms out, and I caught her and held her, and she smelled like the green velvet dress and the strawberry shampoo her mother always used. And I thought, this is what I drove 7 hours for. Derek and Priya appeared a moment later. Derek looked startled, genuinely startled, the way you look when something has happened that you cannot immediately explain. "Dad," he said, "you made it." "Of course I made it," I said. Priya smiled at me. The smile was practiced and even and said absolutely nothing. "We didn't see your truck," Derek said. "I parked down the block," I said. "Didn't want to crowd the driveway." I gave Nora the paper bag. She pulled out the stuffed bear and looked at it with the serious evaluative attention she gives to everything new, and then she clutched it and said it was the best bear she had ever seen, and I told her it had traveled 7 hours to meet her specifically. I said goodnight. I told Derek I would be in touch. I did not say where I was staying. He asked, and I said I had made arrangements, and left it at that. The meeting the next evening was at a restaurant in Scottsdale that Don chose because he had an account there and because the private dining room in the back has no windows to the street. Gerald drove in from Tempe. The Ellison group sent 2 people, a man named Howard, who I had met once before, and his partner, a woman named Cassandra, who said little and noticed everything. The purpose of the meeting, ostensibly, was to discuss the next phase of the East Phoenix development. We were at a point where additional investors were being brought in, where the ownership structure was being formalized on paper for the first time, where my name, my real name, not a shell entity, would appear on documents that were, in commercial real estate terms, not insignificant. What Derek did not know. What Priya did not know. What no one in my family had known for 2 years. Was that the development project they had both made comments about at family dinners, the big East Phoenix thing that Derek had mentioned dismissively as another condo play by out-of-towners, was a project in which I held a 22% stake. Derek was involved in commercial real estate. He worked for a brokerage that handled leasing in exactly the kind of mixed-use properties the Ellison Group built. It was not impossible that he would eventually encounter this particular deal. Don had told me this. He had told me 6 months ago that there was a reasonable chance Derek's firm would be approached to handle leasing for Phase 2. I had said, let it happen. Don had looked at me over his glasses in the way he does when he thinks I am being strategically interesting and he wants to understand before he reacts. I said, when it happens, let me know. He had let me know 3 weeks before that January night. Derek's brokerage had submitted a proposal to handle leasing for the eastern annex of the project, a proposal that required the approval of the primary investors, a proposal that required my approval. I had not yet responded. I had been waiting for the right moment to understand what kind of man my son had become. Not the man he showed me on holidays. The man he was when he thought I was just the old guy with the bad hip and the outdated GPS. I had heard enough. The day after the Ellison meeting, I drove to Derek's office. I did not call ahead. His assistant, a young woman named Bethany who seemed genuinely kind and slightly overwhelmed, told me Derek was in a client call but would be done shortly. I said I would wait. I sat in the reception area and looked at the framed renderings on the wall and drank bad coffee, and after 20 minutes Derek came out and stopped when he saw me. Dad, is everything okay? Everything is fine, I said. Do you have a few minutes? We sat in his office. He had a large desk, and behind it a view of Camelback Mountain, and the kind of organized surface that says, I have an assistant who tidies up before meetings. He sat across from me with his hands folded and his face doing the careful thing it does when he doesn't know what a conversation is about. I told him, plainly, that I had arrived the night before last, that I had been at the door, that I had heard what was said. He started to speak. I said, I'm not here for an apology, Derek. I'm here because I believe in being honest with people before I make decisions that affect them. He was very still. I told him about the trust, about the scope of what I had sold the stores for. Not the number exactly, but enough of it that he understood the scale. I watched his face do something complicated. I told him about the East Phoenix development. I told him about my stake in it. I watched his face do something more complicated. I told him that his firm's leasing proposal was currently sitting, pending, waiting for my signature on an approval that I controlled. The room was very quiet. Dad, he said finally. I love you, I said. I want that to be clear. That does not change. You are my son and Nora is my granddaughter, and none of what I'm saying here is about punishing you. Then what is it about? It's about being honest, I said, with both of us. I have spent years watching you decide what I'm worth. I've watched you reduce me to a problem to manage and a resource to access and a figure who doesn't understand how GPS works. I kept my voice even. This was not a difficult thing for me because I had been thinking it for a long time and the emotion of it had already done its work in that dark truck outside his house in the rain. What I want to tell you is that I am not that person. I never was. And going forward, I'd like us to try something different. What does that mean? It means, I said, that I would like you to know who you are talking to. Not because I need the respect that comes with a bank account. I have never needed that, but because your daughter is 6 years old and she called me herself to make sure I was coming to hear her play the recorder, and I drove 7 hours in a sleet storm because that child still knows, without any confusion at all, what family is. I stood up. My hip was much better that morning. The Biltmore had a good mattress, as I had hoped. The proposal, Derek said. I haven't decided, I said. I'm going to take some time, and then I'm going to decide based on what I actually believe is the right thing, the way I've made every business decision I've ever made. And what about us? That's up to you, I said. It always has been. I picked up my jacket from the chair. I thought about Eleanor and what she would say right now, and I decided she would say the same thing I had just said, only with better phrasing and a look that would have made it unnecessary to say anything else. Nora left the bear in my truck by accident, I said. Can you let her know I'll mail it back? I'll add a note. I left his office. I nodded to Bethany on the way out. I walked through the parking lot in the winter Phoenix sun, which is the best sun anywhere on earth. And I got in my old truck, which I drive not because I cannot afford another one, but because it belonged to my father, and I find, at 71, that I like having something of his with me on long drives. And I sat for just a moment before I turned the key. Then I headed toward the highway. I had a drive ahead of me. 7 hours, more or less, depending on the weather. Plenty of time to think about what I wanted the next part of my life to look like. Plenty of time to decide what a man owes the people who have disappointed him and what he owes the ones who never have. Somewhere past Flagstaff, I stopped for coffee. The woman at the counter, older than me, small, with the kind of face that had been outside in all kinds of weather, looked at my truck through the window and said, "Long drive?" "Coming back from visiting family," I said. "Good visit?" I thought about it. Nora in the green velvet dress, the look on her face when she found mine in the crowd. The bear with the red scarf. "Part of it," I said. "The best part was very good." She handed me the coffee and said she hoped the drive home was clear. It was. I've been thinking about that drive home a lot lately. The way the sun came through the windshield somewhere past Flagstaff. The way the road opened up and went quiet, and how strange it was to feel. Not bitter, not broken, but clear. Cleaner than I had felt in years, actually. People ask me sometimes how I stayed calm through all of it. How I did not lose my temper in Derek's office, did not make it ugly, did not do what part of me wanted to do, which was to lay out every year of disappointment like evidence at a trial. And the honest answer is that I had already done that work. Alone in the dark, in a truck in the rain outside a house I had never been invited to properly. By the time I walked into his office the next morning, the anger had already burned itself down to something quieter and more useful. What I've come to believe, and I did not arrive at this easily, it took me most of my 70s to get here, is that the way people treat you is almost never really about you. Derek did not look at me and see his father. He saw a category. An aging man with a bad hip and an old truck. He made a decision about what that meant, and he stopped looking further. That is not cruelty exactly. It is laziness. It is the particular laziness of people who believe they already understand a situation and so stop paying attention to it. The cost of that laziness is that you miss things. You miss the 22% stake. You miss the fact that the man you are dismissing helped build something real and still has enough standing and enough sense to make decisions that affect your professional life. You miss him, standing at your door in the sleet, hearing everything, and here is what I keep coming back to when I think about Nora. She is 6 years old. She has none of the information Derek has. She does not know about the trust or the development deal or the hardware stores. She only knows that I said I would come, and so she looked for me in the crowd, and when she found me, that was enough. That was the entire equation for her. He said he would be here. He is here. There is an intelligence in that, not a child's intelligence. Something older than that. Something most of us have and then slowly talk ourselves out of as we get more sophisticated. The intelligence of paying attention to what people actually do. Not what they own or what they represent or what category they fall into, what they do. I drove 7 hours in a sleet storm because a 6-year-old asked me to come hear her play the recorder. That is who I am. I spent years hoping Derek would eventually see that, and maybe he will, and maybe he will not. And either way, I have decided I am done making myself smaller to make the gap between us feel less significant. What I can do, the only thing any of us can ever really do, is keep showing up for the people who are still looking for us in the crowd. Nora got her bear back. I mailed it with a note that said, "For the girl who played the hard part. Love, Grandpa Walt." She called me when it arrived. She said the bear was very happy to be home. So was I.